Hey guys, I am back with a grand tournament report. I'm going to try to get this done in about 30 minutes. I recorded a previous version of this video that by the time I was done talking, it was an hour and a half. Way too long. Even I didn't care about what I was saying at that point. So I'm going to kind of breeze through my games, give a high-level view of what was going on. I do have some pictures, more from some games, less from others, depending on how intense the games were, so just kind of bear with me. But yeah, the point is to kind of just talk about my overall experience with the two-day event, which was actually my first two-day event ever for Warhammer, despite me having been playing it off and on for well over a decade at this point. So we'll start off with my list. Should be no real surprise. The people that follow my competitive battle reports, my standard, pretty heavy Black Legion with Malefic Lord support and obliterators. You can go ahead and have a look at it here. There will be some changes to this list, kind of brought about by the event, but this is what I took to the event, and I've been practicing for probably a good month, 2 months, something like that before it. So my first round of the day on Saturday was against a Dark Eldar player, pretty good local player, running a very close combat and speedy Dark Eldar list, bikes, Hellions, a lot of witches, raiders, a little bit of homunculus, stuff like that. So you can see here that he's kind of bundled up in the corner. We go over to my perspective. I am also very bundled up in the corner. My plan in this game was to be able to weather the storm and really outshoot the Dark Eldar. My big worry was giving up objectives and things like that because his army is significantly faster than mine. He can go and claim things with Raiders, Hellions, Reavers, all kinds of stuff. Reavers had +2 movement for their combat drugs, so all kinds of speed all over the place, whereas my army is has a lot more volume, so I can hold ground very well, but I don't get to the ground that I want to hold maybe as quickly as other armies. So I was very conscious of objectives in this game. If we go over here, you can see that kind of throughout the first the first turn, he was grabbing objectives. I actually forced him to go first, even though I won the roll, because I wanted him to strike out and go get those objectives and be able to kind of hit first, because my army, most of the things that matter are actually in deep strike. So like Dark Lances, blasters, all that kind of stuff. Really very little to do in terms of shooting, and then because of how the objectives were spread out, he had to advance with a lot of things, so not even very much shooting done there, because -1 to hit or can't shoot at all in some cases. So I think that was definitely the right decision. You can see here that most of the army is kind of bundled up in the middle there behind those ruins. And then this kind of throughout the game, starting with the first turn, I was doing just a ton of damage. Like the first turn, I killed all the bikes, all the Reavers, one of the Raiders, damaged the pain engine, the Chronos pain engine or something like that. I forget what it's called. And then you can see here, like dropping some obliterators on the side, not only to sort of threaten those objectives, but also to get me recon, which was one of my secondaries. Again, kill all the bikes up there, running the horrors up, so that I'm kind of spreading out my army, which has a lot more models than the Dark Eldar army. And now that I've removed a lot of their speed, a lot of the Dark Eldar players' speedier units, it's going to be difficult for him to take those objectives from me. It's like, do you want to fight the bulk of my army, or do you want to go fight these, like, maybe some 3 obliterators over here, maybe some horrors over here, and then yeah, you'll probably kill those things, but then you're going to be facing down an army full of las guns with Abaddon rerolls, which is like the last thing the Dark Eldar ever wants to see, whether they're playing a more mechanized version or a more foot version. Yeah, this is just blowing some more stuff up in the middle. My opponent definitely brought some Scourges in on the second turn, trying to punch back a little bit. The Scourges all had blasters, so killing some of the obliterators and stuff like that, just try to strike back. But basically, in the end, I forced his hand as I kind of planned to, as you can see here with the giant melee in the middle. had my horrors screening my army very well, and then eventually the witches kind of had to come into those. Some of the raiders charged my cultists. Pretty big mistake here, I think, on my opponent's end, charging 2 raiders into one cultist unit instead of 1 raider into each unit, so that I have to fall back with both and can't shoot. That's definitely a weakness I realized as I was playing over the course of the weekend, is that these big cultist units very easy to tie up, and I don't have a lot of things to get them out of combat, especially with more resilient threats. But like I said, lucky for me that he didn't do that, so had a good 80 cultists to just annihilate these witches with on the next turn after they made short work of the horrors, which is the whole reason for them to be in the list. Over on the right, kind of had like a minor battle the whole game where I had some obliterators trudging towards those scourges, trading shots with them, stuff like that. Failed a couple charges on my end, but eventually was able to wear most of them down. And then you can see here one of the characters going and trying to finish off the last obliterators, but not very well equipped to deal with Terminator armor models. So I was actually able to eventually punch that character to death with just one obliterator, which was kind of funny and a fitting end to the game. And then you can see here in the middle, a lot of those wounds, which are represented by the dice, are from the homunculus releasing the casket of flensing. But that was pretty much the best roll my opponent had. The game was, I think he did damage to every single Malefic Lord except for one, with a 4+ odds. But you can see here, like, all the witches gone. I'm just moving up the table, taking all of the ground, scoring recon every turn. Just a complete landslide here. So basically, I ended up winning that game. Got 30-something points. Gave up a decent amount of points just because the first turn where my opponent was able to, or not, the first couple of turns my opponent was able to hold objectives. Couldn't really stop him from doing that. Most turns he was able to kill at least one unit, whether it be the obliterators with some lances and blasters and stuff like that. But I got a big win, so that was a good way to start off the day there. Second round, I'm up against a Craft World Eldar player running a very, again, kind of gunliney, more hit-and-run army. Had 3 flyers, had 3 wave serpents, big unit of Dark Reapers, some Psyker support, an Autarch for support, 3 units of Warp Spiders, which is not something I'm used to seeing. So yeah, and some Guardians to screen, stuff like that. Small unit of Rangers, just a little bit all over the place. We ended up playing Hammer and Anvil, and this time my opponent won the roll and forced me to go first. You can see in the upper corner of the picture there that he had some Rangers. I moved a unit of Horrors and deep struck my Sorcerer over there to deal with them. Killed them pretty easily. Reason that the Sorcerer would be able to get back in the game with his jump pack. So, no real problems there. Other than that, I'm just kind of surging forward, trying to, get to grips with his army because his army was very gunliney. You can see the deployment over here, classic gunline deployment. Has everything castled in a corner. Has the wave serpents with guardians in them, and the Dark Reapers characters, stuff like that. This is them getting out, kind of hiding up in the ruins. Everything is a Laytalk, as you would probably imagine for someone playing a gun line. So I'm -1 to hit with everything. So I'm definitely going to be relying on like Abaddon to get some work done for me in this game. Flyer comes over, tries to snipe out the Sorcerer. Unfortunately, I wasn't really... I positioned poorly, basically, so I wasn't able to hide the Sorcerer with the Horrors or anything like that, which I think I could have had I placed my models a little bit smarter. But Flyer basically whiffs all the attacks. It was not the auto-hitting Hemlock Wraith Fighter. It was the other one that has Bright Lances and missiles and stuff. And I only ended up taking 3 wounds, which was pretty good. And then again, this is just kind of the story of this game, is me moving forward, doing some shooting. There's very little that the Craft World player has to threaten me. All the flyers are super anti-tank, so I'm definitely going to lose my obliterators, but I'm kind of willing to trade them to kill the flyers and stuff like that, so I can rack up big game hunter points and make it so that he can't flyer on the table and things like that. On the side of the Dark Reapers, I basically just drowned them in lasgun shots. They were buffed up very highly, like +1 saves. They have a 1+ save while they're in cover, given like guide wide, stuff like that. So instead of trying to hit them with more high AP attacks like the obliterators and stuff, I reason I'll just drown them in saves because I'm hitting them on fives with the cultists, rerolling everything but fours, wounding on fours. I can Veterans of the Long War if I need to, and double tap if I need to. Didn't end up doing that. Rolled pretty nicely on the round, and ended up actually killing all of the Dark Reapers with morale tacked on there as well. So that was definitely a good turn for me. A big turning point for the game was on my opponent's turn 1. He shot into one of my cultist units, killed them down to about 5 models, but with the 5 models left and Abaddon making them immune to morale, I was able to bring them back on the board. And that was kind of the story of the game. That happened a second time on the Craft World turn 2, where they again, same unit of cultists, tried to wear them down, but at that point I'd killed the Dark Reapers, damaged the some of the flyers. They're hitting on 5s. I actually got them all to hit on 5s when the obliterators came down. Things like that, where he just didn't end up having the firepower. Killed one of the guardian units. So those are very good against cultists. Things like that. Crucially, the warp spiders did not end up coming down until turn 3, which I think was a huge mistake. Probably the biggest mistake of the game from my opponent. If he'd brought those down a little bit sooner, he would have been able to finish off that cultist unit on turn 1 almost without a doubt. But leaving them in reserve was kind of pointless. He ended up making. You can see here that the cultist unit comes back, able to tow in to Abaddon's morale aura, as well as grab a nice objective for me. This is kind of just my backfield with everything, looking at the flyer and stuff like that. But eventually I was able to, the warp spiders came down and they made kind of a play for my back objective, which at that point was completely irrelevant. Every turn I'd been killing more things than the Eldar player. I'd been holding more objectives. So I just had such a huge scenario lead that trying to make a desperate play in my backfield with the warp spiders against the brimstone horrors, I barely even paid attention to them. I was focused more on chasing down the characters for Big Game Hunter, chasing down the tanks, or for Headhunter, chasing down the tanks for Big Game Hunter, things like that. And there was never a time where he was even able to time me on objectives just because I had so much board control. You can see here, this is the result of the obliterators coming down, shooting up the flyers. Unfortunately, I had to put the obliterators in a very vulnerable position where everything could kind of counterattack them. But a reason there's not much that I can get done with them this game, and because of survivability wise, and because of the Latok trait, I have to drop pretty close, or I'm hitting on 5s against the flyers because they have -1 to hit for the flyer rule and the craft rule, which is a huge pain, and I think something that the guy I played relied on very heavily. He actually ended up going 4-1 in the event, so I think a lot of people weren't prepared to deal with that, but because of the amount of obliterators I have, as well as smite, I can kind of get around that, and that was a very big thing for me in this game. Again, you can see he tries to finish off the cultist unit after I recycled it. Leaves one guy alive after dumping everything he has into it, like psychic powers, all kinds of stuff. But again, the warp spiders had not come down by this point in time, so he's missing, some crucial extra shots. And again, that's just basically the story of the game, is letting me recycle these units at really no cost to me other than, the command points, but it's absorbing the entire Eldar shooting pretty much. This is just kind of an overview of the table as we go along. You can see here I've wiped out all the Dark Reapers, I've wiped out all the Guardians. The Flyers are kind of trying to castle up, but they're very damaged. My Obliterators are kind of hanging out in the wind, but that's okay because I've damaged the Flyers at this point so badly, and I'm just trying to desperately get my Malefic Lords in range to finish off the Wave Serpents and stuff like that. It did take quite a while before I was able to start the Smite train going. I think it was about turn 3, just because of Hammer and Anvil and the fact that he was never even crossing, I'd say, the 12-inch mark of his deployment zone, like extremely defensively deployed, and that ended up costing him huge on the scenario, which I was pretty happy about because honestly I hate gunline armies. This is when the warp spiders finally came down on my opponent's turn 3. I legit thought he forgot about them to even deploy them, but then he went down and grabbed them, and I was like, oh, okay, he did remember. I just couldn't understand why he left them out of the game for that long. But yep, they came down here and were trying to get in and do some stuff to the Brimstone Horrors. They're way closer than they're legally allowed to be to the Brimstone Horrors. I just didn't even pay attention to that point in the game because I was honestly just trying to get him to move a little bit faster, so I could finish off like Headhunter and Big Game Hunter and so that get as many points as I could before the round ended. This one did take a while just because I had to like move my entire army so often. I was having to bring back an entire unit, so I had to grab them all at like my dead pile, set them up again. Stuff like that was just really slowing it down. So that was definitely a misstep on my part. Not being like, oh, you can't actually be there. You need to back up a little bit. And this is kind of the situation that the game more or less ended in, moving to the other side to try to castle up as the cultists are just crashing through his deployment zone, taking everything. This turn he didn't even have an objective to hold, so he didn't score any points for that just because he had to abandon everything. My Brimstones were still holding mine, but everything else just had to run away from the objective you can see there. And then this is the Warp Spiders just fighting in the background. One unit of them tried to charge the cultists, lost everything and a wound on the Exarch to Overwatch. People continually underestimate the Overwatch that cultists put out, especially against infantry. I usually put them pretty densely, so almost all of them get to rapid fire. So it's just a ton of shots, and then if Abaddon's there, you get to reroll all the misses, so you get to fish for those sixes more and more. And then especially if you're playing a toughness 3 army, like it's just going to be brutal. So he lost a ton of guys there, and then the cultists ended up punching that Exarch to death. So that unit pretty much did nothing. Again, this is just me, taking the deployment zone more and more. He moved that wave serpent back to just, try to at least score a point for holding the objective. And you can see that I'm losing pretty much all my obliterators, but just haven't lost anything that's anything else. Like the Malefic Lords are finally in range. They're starting to smite all those wave serpents to death. The flyers, I've finished them off with some stray shots here and there, some smites here and there, just things like that. And then, I ended up getting another big win in this game. Got all my secondaries maxed out. I had Recon, Big Game Hunter, and Headhunter. Had a huge scenario lead. Like I said, there were some times that the Craft War player didn't even have an objective. I think it was just one turn, but that's still like really bad. And then there were turns where he didn't kill a single unit, which is definitely a big powerful part of my list, especially on turn 1, is like not all armies can kill 40 cultists in one turn, so I can kind of deny points for that, which is very good. But yeah, I got another big win, so heading into 2-0. My goal for the tournament was to go 3-2. That was kind of my primary motivation, and then my secondary goal was to make top 8. So looking good for 3-2 at this point. Round 3, final round of the day, I was against a Ynnari player, so kind of hitting all the flavors of Eldar at this point. Knew this one would be a really tough matchup for me. He had 2 units of Deflamer Wraithguard, a fighty unit of Wraithguard, 3 units of Dark Reapers, all with Tempest Launchers, one big one, the rest at minimum size. He had Yvrain, tons of Psychic support with like multiple Farseers, Spirit Seers, stuff like that. Cabalites, just to be cheap guys to hold objectives. Had the customary Wave Serpents to make sure his army can't get alpha struck that badly. And then probably the only little bit of a weird thing was the Strike and Scorpions. I guess he uses those more to kind of hit an objective and force his opponent to spread out and come deal with them, or pull people off an objective because you can deep strike them in and then cast Quicken on them, so they get pretty much a guaranteed charge, very similar to what Chaos can do. But yeah, really hard list for me because all the Wraithguard and stuff like that. I can't do much to them with Cultists. The Toughness 6 boost is a really big breakpoint for my list compared to when they were Toughness 5 in the Index. And then the Dark Reapers are a big problem because they put out so much damage, particularly the Tempest Launchers. Could just kill tons of Cultists. And then also with the stratagem to shoot an incoming Deep Strike unit, I'm pretty much guaranteed to lose a unit of Obliterators whenever I bring them all in, so I'm effectively playing down, a 195-point unit in exchange for my opponent blowing 1 command point, which is definitely not a good place to be. I didn't take many pictures of this game. This was a pretty intense game for the first couple turns. I was definitely trying to, maneuver and stuff. Long story short, I go second. I didn't want to go second, but lost the die roll, lose an entire unit of cultists on turn one. My opponent's rolling really hot for the Tempest launchers. Without that, I think I would have retained the unit of cultists. I think the first turn he didn't roll less than an 8 for their number of shots, and then got tons of buffs off from his psychic abilities, like definitely guided the big unit of Dark Reapers, all that kind of stuff. But the army didn't have that much long-range firepower, so I was hoping I could kind of weather the storm, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. That left me kind of having to scramble and redeploy to protect my Malefic Lords. Very, very bad deployment on my end this game. I should have done a more like layered and much more focused deployment. Instead, I was just kind of in the middle, as you can see here. The big gap around all those Malefic Lords is the unit that used to be there, so I should have been much more dense and focused, but also left room for my obliterators. As you can see here, I was kind of forced to drop on top of the rocks, more in the front, stuff like that. I only had one unit that was able to drop in the back, and that was just because I needed to get in range to deal with the Dark Reapers, but because the Wraith Guard are so scary, I can't really get close to the Eldar army as much as I want to, so I'm really between a rock and a hard place here. This is just a kind of a blurry photo of his fire base. Sorry about that one. And then basically this game was a stomp, long story short, in my opponent's favor. I got completely hammered, only ended up gaining I think 8 or 9 points. I was doing well on the scenario. The first turn I was able to shoot him off his objective, hold 2 of my own. On his turn 2, he brought in some striking scorpions. I was able to deny quicken, so then they failed their charge, so I was able to continue, holding 2 objectives. But after that, he was just killing so much of my army. The Wraith Guard got into my lines, the Wave Serpents got into my lines. That's why I did not deploy my obliterators as well as I should have. They were a little bit hanging in the wind. I really needed to kind of bubble wrap them with the cultists because they were by far the most important thing in my army this game. I was also able to do very little damage with the Malefic Lords just because of the amount of Deny the Witch that the Eldar army had. Like I said, Yvrain, multiple Farseers, stuff like that. So, +1 to Deny the Witch, reroll Deny the Witch, all kinds of stuff like that. And without being able to smite the Wraith Guard away, and then with losing quite a bit of my obliterators thanks to like Dark Reapers, and also having them charged by Wave Serpents, stuff like that, I wasn't able to deal with those Wraith Guard, and they basically just started getting into my cultists, doing flamer stuff, and I didn't have the character support or close combat support to fight them off, and ended up basically calling it at the bottom of 3. My opponent got a huge victory, not like max points, but like a good mid-30s win, which is a very strong win in the ITC format. And pretty much from the get-go, I was definitely out of it. We both agreed that unfortunately it was kind of a first turn game where if I'd went first, could have alpha struck the Wave Serpent that had his Dark Reapers in it, probably killed that big unit, or at least reduced them significantly. And then at that point, he, one, wouldn't have had a unit to deny my deep strike with in terms of shooting at the obliterators when they came down, because the Dark Reaper started the game in the Wave Serpent, so obviously they can't shoot out of it. And then 2, would not have been able to kind of deal with the obliterators from there. And if I played correctly, could have kind of blocked him off with my cultists, just taken my lumps there, fallen back, shoot with the obliterators, stuff like that. And then from there, it's I'm probably gonna be able to attrition him out. I think in the mid game he would have probably taken a scenario lead, but from there, once the the Wraith Guard started to fall, if I was able to maybe get a Death Hex off or something, even without it, I'd take down the fighty unit and things like that. The army really just falls apart. It heavily relies on the Dark Reaper fire base, and then the Wraith Guard to kind of push and create pressure. And if I'd been able to take one of those parts away, they don't work so well, not in tandem with each other. But really good learning game. I learned a lot from this game. Really enjoyable game to play for me, for like just oh, I made this mistake. I love seeing that kind of stuff. And ended the first day 2-1, which is definitely a good record. So I was pretty feeling pretty good heading into day 2. Unfortunately, at the start of day two, I drew the one person I did not want to play in the whole event, a local player who I've played several times, who plays Imperial Guard and plays an extremely artillery-heavy Catachan list. With a list that does almost nothing against tanks. It completely sells out to kill infantry, which against me is exactly what I don't want to see. And also, we played Hammer and Anvil, which is a complete nightmare against Guard. For it's really easy for them to deny Deep Strike. It's easier for them to keep themselves in the scenario game. The scenario was the one where it's basically like a box. There's 4 objectives in like a box shape. So I have 2 in my deployment zone. He has 2 in his deployment zone. Whereas normally if you play an artillery heavy guard list, you can hold like 1 objective, sometimes 0, depending on what you're playing against, things like that. But the scenario is not going to be as punishing for him as I might have hoped it would be. So you can see the list here. A lot of just bare bones guardsman unit. I think 6 of them. They had like flamers or grenade launchers just to like throw points in there. A couple company commanders, a couple platoon commanders, 2 hellhounds, a punisher, a Maturius Vulcan, which is a Forge World tank, a basilisk, a manticore, a wyvern, 3 heavy quad launchers, which is a nightmare with Catachans and Harker, which he also had, and then some las cannon heavy weapon teams and a sentinel thrown in there, as well as a searchlight. So I think the army is just a brigade. So he has a ton of command points, and then with the guard traits and stuff like that, you can get command points back. So that's going to be a nightmare. Forcadia is going to be a nightmare. So I pretty much expected to get crushed this game. To make matters even worse, I went second, and on the first turn, pretty much lost a full unit of cultists and almost another full unit of cultists. I think I had like 5 models left or something like that. And basically just straight up told him, like, hey, I'll probably play the first couple turns just to try to squeak out some secondaries, and then I'll give it to you, just because you're a local player, and I want you to get some more points. Keep that on the down low. But on my first turn, I recycle the cultist unit that got shot up real bad, get over to the side, and then bring my obliterators down while moving my army up, of course. And the obliterators go completely berserk. On the first turn, they kill the Punisher, they kill the Hellhound. I smite the other Hellhound to death. They kill a quad launcher. And then I think they killed the Sentinel. So I pretty much just wiped out the guard on the left-hand side there. And then on the right-hand side, I actually make a charge into the infantry squad, which didn't end up doing much. I rolled really poorly and only killed 2 of the guardsmen there. Would have been nice to kill some more to at least force a good morale check or make him use some command points or something. But because of the positioning and because I got a good roll, I think I got like 10 inches or something, I'm actually able to put more of my models within 3 inches of his objective than he has. So crucially, not only did I kill more units than him, but I hold more objectives than him. So I get a big 4-2 lead to start the game with, and also I'm doing well on my secondaries. I took against Guard. Guard gets to give up secondaries, which is part of their weakness in the ITC missions, which I like because Guard is a little too strong in my opinion. But I had Big Game Hunter, the Reaper, and Headhunter, so I've already managed to blow up 3 tanks. So I'm already pretty much maxed out on that one. And then this is just kind of an overview of my army. Slight positioning mistake here. Shouldn't have probably landed those obliterators where I did. They ended up doing very little. Like I said, they killed a heavy quad launcher, and I think they shot into a unit. You can see at the top of the screen there, kind of hid behind the ruins. I put the other 3 units. That was a way better position for them. There's almost nothing over there to threaten them except for the las cannon teams. Whereas on the right, which is at the bottom of the table, the Maturius Vulcan is just rubbing his hands together. Can't wait to shoot into those obliterators and put Forcadia on it to just blow them away. And then, I actually took very few pictures of this game. Sorry. This game only went 3 turns. My army took a long time to shoot and move, and then the Guard army took forever to shoot, re-rolling all kinds of stuff for hits, for number of shots, tons of guns everywhere, things like that. But basically what happened is on the second turn, I was able to continue what I did by shooting the Guard off of the objective from on my left flank. So again, I was able to hold more objectives than him, and because there's so few units in my army and he has so many tanks and little infantry squads and stuff, I was also able to kill more units, and then that was the same thing on the third turn as well. So I ended up actually squeaking out a scenario victory in a game where I was extremely not favored, I would say. Like everything went against me this game, but I managed to pull it out by kind of playing to the mission, and I would say playing fairly aggressively. The Obliterators were definitely the all-stars. They took tons of shooting. You know, it got to the point where even like the mortar shots and stuff like that were going into them just like in desperation to remove them. They ended up, killing all the las cannons. They almost killed a character, but he made every invulnerable save, so that was kind of annoying. But they killed the mortar tank. They killed what else did they kill? Some more infantry units. Just stuff like that, and I still probably had, I think, 6 by the time the game was over, and that was with throwing away a whole unit of them by putting them in line of sight of the Vulcan, where I could have put them all outside of line of sight of it, force it to move, which cuts the number of shots it has in half, because if it doesn't move during the shooting phase, it gets heavy 30 instead of heavy 15, and also makes it hit on 5s, best case scenario, and then it's unlikely to do that much damage to me, and then I can probably kill it the next turn with my Obliterators as well if he decides to move over there. So that was definitely the big mistake I made this game. My opponent made a lot of mistakes that we talked about afterwards. Like I said, I'm good friends with this guy. He did not use Forcadia on turn 1, which would have allowed him to finish off the second cultist unit that he almost finished, which would have completely been the game at that point. I wouldn't have had enough presence on the field. I wouldn't have been able to defend my characters. I wouldn't have been able to get that crucial charge off, most likely, on turn 1 to get him off his objective, so to speak. So huge mistake there. Just made some targeting mistakes. Was getting pretty frazzled by my Obliterators. Just a lot of small stuff like that. On my side, the Malefic Lords were definitely pretty useless this game. They killed the Hellhound turn 1, and then they threw some smites into some infantry units and stuff like that, but I should have been probably a lot more aggressive with them. And then also the line of sight was really hurting them because I was so much on the back foot from turn 1, and I had to push up my cultists into such weird places, I couldn't really defend them that well. So I was a little bit worried about getting them killed when I kind of just should have thrown caution to the wind and been, using them to run, maybe like tie stuff up on turn 3, things like that, just in case the game went long or anything like that. So they were probably, the low light of this game, but a lot of that is kind of going to how I played them. So after that round, I was at 3-1, which is really great. I did not expect to win this game. I didn't get a huge score for it because we only played 3 turns, but got the win, got some points, and was in a position to actually play for top 8 in the last round, which I thought was really cool. That was my kind of backup goal. Unfortunately, in the 5th round, I played against my friend Rob, who plays Ultramarines. Again, you've probably seen him featured on my blog before. I played him with Orcs a few times, played him in the other tournament I played in early on in 8th edition. And he plays an all-Primaris Ultramarine army, except for like a flyer. Basically, that's the only non-Primaris thing in the list. And I was, I'm going to just be honest, shocked at how well he did. He was 3-1 at that point with Primaris, which nobody is going to say is a competitive army, especially before Chapter Approved comes out or anything like that. But he was just owning it. His list is 3 units of Intercessors, 10-man unit of Hellblasters, Repulsor Tank, Gilliman, Ancient with the Banner of the Emperor Resplendent, a Lieutenant, a Psyker, and then the Xiphon Flyers you can see in the back. So definitely doing the best you can with Primaris. Good amount of command points, good amount of getting value out of his guys even if they die and stuff like that, trying to protect them from Alpha Strike. Got Big Boy Gilliman in there, all kinds of stuff. But I was disappointed to have to play him, honestly, because I know what kind of list he runs. I know how terrible of a matchup it is against the type of list I'm bringing. But we definitely played it out. So you can see here I'm a deploy. We got Hammer and Anvil again. He opted to go first. I was fine with that because I wanted him to go first anyways. This is his kind of turn one. He's moved up with the repulsor with the plasma guys in it. Moved up with the flyer. Everybody else is kind of hiding. There's 2 units of intercessors in those way far ruins that you can barely see in the picture. There's 5 intercessors kind of behind that wall in the more centered ruins. The ancient is in there, stuff like that. So being perhaps a little overly cautious with his models against what I have, really needs every shot he can get. Probably had to take a risk and play for turn one, because really the only chance he had was to wipe out one of my cultist units and then to kind of attack the game from there. So yeah, you can see here just way too much stuff hiding behind the ruins. It's not going to be able to shoot or anything. Not going to be able to put any damage to any of my cultists. We did play the scenario where you each have 1 objective in your deployment zone, which is quite bad for Primaris. Because they have to leave, 1 or maybe 2 things behind to hold the objective, because Primaris Marines are still pretty easy to kill, and that means they can't fight as easily. This is the amount of damage that my cultists took after the repulsor Gilliman had their way with them. The flyer tried to shoot into the brimstones after Rob could see that he wasn't going to finish the unit off. Humorously didn't kill a single one of them, mostly due to his dice rolls, not mine. But from here, the game is more or less decided. Spoiler alert. On my turn, I smite the flyer to death. The obliterators come in. I shoot the repulsor to death. I shoot a few more of the plasma, the hellblasters to death, and that's really taking out his big character and obliterator killer threat in the flyer, and his big just kind of all around threat in the repulsor, and also really limits his mobility. So you can see everybody kind of piling out there. Oh yeah, he has a unit of Reavers. I forgot to mention that. They kind of come in the backfield. Unfortunately, did not have the ability to do very much, just because they have the bolters, which I think is a great way to run them. It's much better than the combat variant. But I've just I recycled my unit of cultists, so at this point there's not enough shooting left in his army to kill one of them in a whole turn. So they're kind of just angling to at least maybe tie up one of the obliterator units. It's kind of the best they can hope for at this point. Gilliman just gets into the fray, starts munching on some cultists. I'm fine with that. He's going to be busy with that for at least a round or two, while I can deal with the rest of the army. Gilliman did have Psychic Fortress on him, or I would have just smited him to death or something. But with that being the case, and because of his positioning, I can use the ruins so that I cannot see him, and then just like smite the Hellblasters to death, the characters, all that kind of stuff, and then kind of come around to Gilliman with my whole army when I feel like it. So this is the Reavers making a charge. I did lose 2 guys on the Overwatch, which was pretty lucky of me. Gilliman just munching on more cultists. Combat, I think I punched another Reaver to death without losing any wounds, so things are really going downhill for the Ultramarines at this point. And then this is me falling back, shooting more of the Reavers. I got the Sorcerer in combat with them, so that unit's pretty much taken care of on my turn 2, I think. And then this is, all the Hellblasters gone. The Intercessors came through, killed all of them as well, just left the Sergeant with 1 wound. The Banner is kind of hiding in the back with the Librarian, but I basically crushed the center, and the Intercessors with the Lieutenant are still hiding back in that building on Rob's objective, just trying to, get as many points as he can. Gilliman still munching through cultists. The Reavers fall back from combat because they can fall back and shoot with the Ultramarines trait, just kind of their last stand before I mop them up as well. And then on my turn 3, I do just that. I killed the Primaris Sergeant, the Primaris Librarian, the rest of the Reavers, and then I kind of surround Gilliman, get a Death Hex off on him just to add insult to injury. I'd also miscast with 2 Malefic Lords, so they have the offensive stats of Demon Princes pretty much. Shot Gilliman to death, shot and smite him to death. He gets back up in the combat phase, only with 1 wound, which is kind of a bummer for me because I had Kingslayer with him as the target, so I can't get full points for that now, but it's fine. And then I charge him with the Cultist to absorb the Overwatch, charge him with the Obliterators to get them out of the way, get Abaddon in there, get 3 Malefic Lords in there, including the 2 that were supercharged, and then Abaddon just kills him with the Power Fist right away, so I didn't even have to get into any of that other stuff. And then this is, you can see how much of the board I'm controlling. My Brimstones are holding my objective completely uncontested. At this point, I'm just advancing everything I have towards Rob as quickly as I can. Blew some command points on a unit that wasn't damaged just to get it closer to Rob so that I can make a play for his objective, because in this one it's the number of units you have within 3 inches of it. I just want to kind of shoot him and or make him come out or something like that. Put more pressure on him and just kind of end the game. This is just my backfield being held. This is him helping me move my rats forward. And basically, what happened is the Primaris, one of the units of Primaris came out of the ruins to charge the cultists to hold them back. I killed 4 of them with Overwatch, thanks to Abaddon and rolling really, really hot, and Rob rolling really bad saves. And then I put down the lieutenant in combat with the cultists. So unit of cultists killed a whole unit of intercessors and lost, I think, 1 model. So that was just completely absurd. At that point, we decided to call it. We basically, reasoned that next turn I was going to shoot and smite him off of the table, except for the ancient, so that I could, rack up the bonus points and stuff like that. But I would get full secondaries except for Kingslayer. I would get the bonus point for the last 2 turns of the game, stuff like that. So we just kind of talked through that, and he gave it to me. So I got another huge win. My second or maybe first biggest of the weekend. I don't quite remember. I was definitely disappointed to have to play against someone that I know and play against semi-regularly, especially in such a one-sided matchup, which was, kind of dictating which one of us would get top 8. But it was out of my hands, unfortunately. And then I ended up getting 4th, actually, out of a 40-man field. So went 4-1, got 4th. The only people ahead of me were the 2 undefeateds in the last round, and the gentleman that I lost to with the Inari army. So that was, all very good players ahead of me. The guy that won was playing Alpha Legion with Berserkers and Cultists. His big tactic seemed to be triggering the infiltrate stratagem multiple times before the game started, and then just dumping the Berserkers and the Cultists in your face on turn 1, moving them all up, engaging your whole army, and then from there it was kind of over. He also had Malefic Lords, Obliterators, all kinds of good stuff like that, but was playing a brigade, which I thought was kind of neat. And then the guy he beat was a local player who has been spamming Plague Burst Crawlers lately, and will probably spam more of them if the rumored chapter approved points discount on them is true. But I did not watch their game, unfortunately, so I don't really know what happened. But yeah, lots of chaos in the top portion of the. I think the top 8 was almost all chaos and Eldar of various kinds. There was one Tyranid player who I think got 7th. But yeah, very chaosy and very. And then very Eldari. We didn't really have that many Imperium players, to my surprise. Had a couple, a guy running Gilliman and Celestine. I think he went 3-2. I don't know what that story was, but yeah, just not really that much Imperium. So kind of a weird event in that respect, but definitely a fun one, and I was pretty happy with my placement. And then I'll go through some of the thoughts I had with the event. So the non-MVPs, the least valuable players I had all weekend, were probably the Malefic Lords. They did really well in the last round against Primaris Marines, but that's just such a bad matchup for Primaris Marines. Just the Obliterators alone can get me there. They did very little against Guard. They did pretty little against the Dark Eldar. Again, that's like a matchup where I don't really need them. They did not very much against the Craftworld player because I was not able to get in range really against his very gunline centric army. They didn't do very much against the Inari player because of all the Deny the Witches. So they just didn't do that much. They're still completely overpowered, but I'm already kind of designing lists that aren't really running any of them. Having that much Deny the Witch is really good, especially against Eldar and stuff. But the Smite battery has definitely been. It's kind of a win more thing at this point, especially against really good players. People that know how to screen, that know what units to feed you, stuff like that. It's just it's not as powerful as it can be when you look at it on paper. It's still extremely powerful, of course, but it's not going to win you games by itself. The MVPs of the weekend were definitely the Obliterators. They pretty much won me the Imperial Guard game just by killing so much and attracting so much attention. They were consistently, a huge alpha strike every game. From round 1 through round 5, always coming down, doing tons of damage. Their worst game was against the Inari player, and that was a combination of me, not giving them the protection they needed, and also not having just a good foothold in that game. There's several reasons for it, so that's not really something I put blame on the unit for. It was more how that game was shaping up, and also some mistakes I made. So yeah, huge thumbs up to Obliterators. They continue to impress me more and more the more I play with them. They're probably my favorite unit that Chaos has. So I just love them. Alpha Legion, I will probably be switching my list in a pretty major way to run all the Obliterators as Alpha Legion. The more I'm playing, the more attention they keep getting. Especially if they have a big first turn, they have like a psychological impact where people are like, okay, I just have to kill those things before they start rolling, AP 2 or 3 damage shots into me. It's completely devastating. So having that additional -1 to hit is actually really good and kind of helps them with their medium range. So a lot of people will shoot them with like devastators, artillery, stuff like that. That is always over 12 inches away, and if you can stack -1 to hit on top of that and get them into cover, they are extremely hard to kill. A lot of the guns that people will throw into them are like AP2, AP3. So if you can get them into cover, they get like a 3 or a 4+ save, and it's just so difficult to get rid of them at that point, especially if you have -1 to hit, like I said. Originally, I was running them as Black Legion to give them rerolls with Abaddon, but I've been really struggling to keep the cultists in a good formation around Abaddon, and then also make room for the Obliterators to get within range of his aura, while also making sure that they have line of sight and range to their target. And then sometimes, them needing to be in cover, stuff like that. So I'm more likely to switch them to Alpha Legion, also just run a separate Lord with like a jump pack or Terminator armor or something like that, probably a jump pack, to have that be like its own little part of the army. So it doesn't have to land near Abaddon. They can go wherever I want. The Lord can deep strike with them. I can make the Lord a little bit fightier so that he can kind of get them out of combat if he needs to, where instead of relying on Abaddon to be in too many places at once. So that's definitely something I picked up as a good strong tip for the event. And then my last thought is just 8th edition, super bubble wrap heavy. I've been saying this for a long time, especially to people that ask me like advice, how can I make my list better, things like that. You just got to have bubble wrap, you got to have screens, you got to have throwaway units. Doesn't matter what army you're playing. That's one of the reasons that armies like Necrons, pure Space Marines, stuff like that are really struggling right now, because they don't have any cheap guys to go hold objectives, go take objectives, eat smites, go tie things up so that it's not shooting you. All of these really like just dirty, unglamorous jobs that things like Imperial Guardsmen, cultists, orc boys, all those kinds of units do, that those armies maybe just don't have access to, or if they do have access to them, they're not commonly taken units. So I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I don't think Smite's going to get worse. You'll probably see a little bit less Smite spam with Malefic Lords gain almost a certain nerf, and then Primaris Psychers maybe gain a nerf. We'll see what else happens with other Psychers, things like that. But the game is still going to be very objective focused, still going to be very you need those units to go do those dirty jobs, and I think that even if you have to run something like Scouts or Scarabs, Crute Hounds, if you're playing Tau, stuff like that, you just really have to incorporate those into your overall list build. Otherwise, your list is very one-dimensional, and I was seeing that with a lot of the armies I was playing against. Is like, the Primaris army did not have a unit to go do those things. The Guard player was not maybe being as active with those units as he should have. The Craft World player did not really have any of that stuff. Just things like that were I think really holding people back and kind of forcing them into this one-dimensional gunline game, which just does not work very well in ITC missions. If you rely on shooting your opponent off the board, and then you run into a very powerfully built army that's run by a competent player, you can't do that. It's not going to work all the time, especially if you go second or something. People are getting better against those kind of alpha strikey gunline lists with running like deep strikers, running minus to hit, abusing terrain, using transports, which absorb just tons of damage, and then you don't always have the shots left over to kill the units. Very popular with Eldar. The game is not as gunline happy as it was when it first came out, and I think people are too slow to adjust to that. Big infantry units have always been powerful ever since the edition came out. Obviously, some of the outliers have been nerfed, like conscripts have taken a hit, stuff like that. Brimstones have taken a hit, but they're still kind of the workhorse of the edition and of most armies. So if you're out there and you're maybe making a look at making a change to your list, I would say, hey, throw some chaff in there, and if you use it correctly, and you throw them where they need to be to do the unglamorous work, they'll do it, and you'll get good wins out of it. That's definitely what I was seeing in my games. I think I could have exploited my horrors a lot more than I did. That's something I'm going to really be focusing on in my games to come. But yeah, like my cultists were just always rock solid presences, and then the people that I was seeing, like the Tyranid players that had gaunts and stuff like that, always doing well with them. So yeah, the armies that can have access to those kind of cheaper choices, I think, definitely are at a marked advantage in a lot of situations, especially when it comes to the missions. But yeah, thanks for checking out my report. I know it was kind of a long and less focused one that I'd like to make. Like I said, I'm sorry, some of the games were really intense. We were on a 2.5 hour time limit. My army's quite big and can take a while to play. Some of my opponent's armies, also took a while to play. So I kind of had to sacrifice taking pictures at times in order to just keep things going, and that was more important to be honest. But I'll be back to doing normal battle reports here very soon. I have a couple games lined up. As in just a few weeks from now, there is a invitational tournament that I qualified for. I think it's an 8-player invitational with all the big heavy hitters in my local area, so I definitely want to practice up for that and see how well I can do in that one as well. So yeah, thanks for checking out the video. Be sure to leave any comments. I'm happy to talk more about any of the games, go into more detail about any of my thoughts in the comment section or anything like that. So don't be shy if you have any questions or criticisms or anything like that. And thanks for checking me out.